For those of you that don't know Noah and Pauline, they've been coming to Woodside for a long time. And they've been married a long time. How many years? 51.
51.
Okay, and Noah, where'd you guys get married at? Where'd you get married? You got married somewhere, right? Yeah, okay.
We got married at Wallenstein. Back then, everybody got married at Wallenstein.
Okay. For those of you that don't know, Wallenstein's about 10 minutes from here, and we are a church plant of Wallenstein, so 51 years ago. So thanks for being up here. I know, Pauline, you'd probably like to eat minnows rather than be up here. I don't know. Okay, so thank you for being up here. Okay, let's keep it moving. Okay. Noah and Pauline, over your 51 years of marriage, would you share with us just a few ways that you guys have stayed close together, hearts turned? Because with kids especially, you have 3 kids, your hearts, like, you can get too busy for each other. So.
Sure, 51 years, it's certainly hard to believe, but you know what? There's people here that are married for longer than that, and I know them, and so they're here.
Yeah, they're old, Noah, we know.
Well, we've had a good marriage. We're very thankful for that. We both came into the marriage as believers, Christians. We grew up in Christian homes. Pauline grew up in a family of 7 kids, and I grew up in a family of 5. And coming into it as believers, that gives you a solid foundation, which we're very thankful for. But it doesn't make it perfect, because we're still 2 imperfect people. And as you go through your courting years into marriage, you know, you hear people talk about seasons of life and stages, and it's so true. At this vantage point, looking back, it's much easier to pick out those stages than when you're right in it. You know, you're struggling through it sometimes, but we were fortunate in that. Our focus was Christ-centered, and that certainly gives you a solid foundation to work from. So things were going good. Things were going real good. And then all of a sudden, little people started entering our life. Well, that changes things. And I'm so thankful that very early on, both of us agreed and got to the point where we decided we're going to enjoy every stage of life and marriage. And that was worth a lot, to be able to look at it that way. So we weren't able to focus on each other as much as we did at the start, so we had to think of ways to do things a little different. And I'd like to say at this point, we didn't write the book on this. We just worked our way through it, and we're going to share some of the things we did. It might look similar to yours. It might be way different than what you did. But whatever works and whatever you can agree on doing. So we would often, Pauline would often say that she was a stay-at-home mom at that time, and all day she's with little people. She was just so wanting to talk to an adult. Well, she was so fortunate that she had me, of course. So we would think of ways that we could be together and focus on each other, and we still wanted to be responsible parents. We were happy to have children. We have 3 kids, and some of you know them well. You grew up with them, but they've all kind of moved out of the area, so some of you don't know them at all. But we would often get them put to bed, and then we would sit down and have a cup of tea and debrief and discuss, or other times we would play some games. Had to modify the games a little bit so as not to make too much noise, or we'd have company. And every once in a while, we'd roll out the barbecue at midnight and barbecue some steaks and get out the linen tablecloth and the best china and have a dinner for 2 at midnight. So things like that, from this to that, we worked our way through.
Then when these little people grew up, they'd stay up as long as we did. and I was cheated out of my time. So that took a little bit of working through. And then there was the next stage where by that time I was working full time. So Saturdays was my packed full day. But these teenagers wanted a quiet house, and they wanted to sleep till noon. And so we had to figure that out. And so on the Saturday that Noah did not work, we went for breakfast together and left the sleepy people at home. And then we'd get groceries after, so I still got one of my chores checked off. Each stage also meant more of a challenge for times when we could talk. And I remember a couple of times that whoever's turn it was to help me with the dishes was excused, and Noah would help me with the dishes because the kids didn't bother us while we were doing dishes.
That's great. And Noah and Pauline, with you, you mentioned, wanted Christ in your marriage, the center of your marriage. Could you share a little bit about how he worked in you? Let's start individually in your relationship. So Pauline, back when you were early married in your 20s, could you share a little bit of how you grew in your faith? And then Noah, how you grew? And then after, if you could mention about Christian friends and having the church there. Okay.
When we got married, it was only 3 years that I had been out of a very traditional, legalistic kind of a church. So when I got into the Wallenstein Bible Chapel, and the Bible teaching just whet my appetite completely. I really wanted to grow spiritually. And so I discovered things like you mentioned them in the sermon about being unselfish, loving one another, and serving one another. And I thought, well, I'm in a great classroom as a marriage and family life. Like, this is time to practice what I'm learning. Also, one of the wedding gifts was a wall hanging of the Serenity Prayer, and I kind of clung to that one to ask God to give me the serenity to accept what I can't change, and the courage to change what I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So that was a big part of my early Christian growth.
One of the things that stayed with me for years and years, we often had home Bible studies known as life groups back in the day, and be studying for these Bible studies and sessions together. And one particular year, we were doing a character study of Old Testament individuals that are mentioned in Scripture. And the one that really stayed with me was about King David, Israel's second king, David, and his life. And reading the account of David and reading the many writings that he did, he was in constant communication with God. He was either honoring him, just in awe of him, worshiping him, or he'd come to him with some tough questions. He had questions, but he was constantly had a relationship with God wide open all the time. And that just really stuck with me. When adversity comes along, you don't need to get this relationship with God repaired. It's there, and it's ready to go. And I thank God for that. That helped me many times to grow in our relationship with each other and of course, with God.
Noah and Pauline, you guys are so solid in the Christian faith, but we go back and you had to learn, and individually and then as a couple. And then Christian friends and being in a church, how did that? Yeah.
I don't remember ever really discussing with Noah about our expectations or our commitment to the church. We just had it. On Sundays, we were going to church. It didn't matter what stage and age the babies were or the kids were. We packed up, and Sundays we were in church. And we wanted to also be involved in the activities and the ministries there. So our kids just knew Sundays we go to church.
We were blessed with a big circle of really good friends, and I'd like to give people the encouragement to have good friends in your life. That's worth so much. But we'd often joke that the circle of friends in the same stage that we were at, pretty much the same age, we were raising each other's kids. And we'd often joke about it. Your kids aren't going to date anybody till we get the approval of the whole group. But it was so good. We'd do camping in the summer and other activities. It's just so good and encouraging to have good friends. So that was just a blessing to be a part of our life.
Yeah, great. You know, you mentioned about back in the day that you were just committed to the church. And I just want to say to the young people now that you're running, I wonder if we should have Christian friends and go to church. That a study not too long ago has come out, and that couples that go to church are happier in their marriages than couples that don't. And I think part of it too is just having other supports around them and Christian friends. So, okay, and then just as we close, a few last things. In marriage, could you just touch on expectations and how about differences?
Well, when you're engaged and you're looking forward to marriage and it's going to be a commitment for life, I had stars in my eyes and the goal was to have a perfect marriage. I didn't factor into the fact that I'm imperfect and this man that I loved was also imperfect. So there were irritations and disappointments and whatnot that we had to work through. But it makes me think of one of my married daughters had called me one day, some years ago, and she wanted me to suggest reading material for her. And she said, I am so tired of Christian fiction where men cry and they always have the right words to say. And that was me in my day at one time too. Life is not scripted. Life happens, and then we make choices as to what we're going to do about those irritations and disappointments. Basically, I had to grow up. But just being considerate of one another and to be content and to learn thankfulness is a big, big jump into a happy marriage. Oh, differences you wanted? No.
Do you have
well,
any?
We are different.
Yeah.
All of his love of politics or economics and all that stuff. And I would much rather talk about people and sociology, psychology, and those things. We make a choice. Am I going to be bored with his talk? Or am I going to learn from him? So those are things you have to almost do daily, is make those choices.
Yeah.
When Jesus was here on earth teaching his disciples and the people around him, he gave a directive or a command to love one another. And so that is an active thing to do. And we prayed that God would help us to love the person in our life the way we ought to. And with the Holy Spirit within us, we're able to do that. Many times on our own strength, my own strength, I couldn't do that properly. But with God's help, it's a whole lot better. Probably not perfect, but at least better.
Great. Okay, thank you for joining us. And I know one of the things you have said in your marriage in the past is to anybody else getting married, is just learn to be nice to each other. Is that, yeah?
It helps.
It helps, okay. Okay, and one last question. Did you ever ask God to help you to love your spouse?
Oh, yeah. Every day.
Every day, there you go. Okay, great. So we commend you, 51 years of marriage, keep going. Thank you for your example.